assistant professor of practice in the Department of Religious Studies and Classics at the University of Arizona. And a little background on my talk today. This goes actually back to the 2019 CAA conference in Krakow. And I know Aris was there, and Sebastian was there, and some of the other people in the audience as well. And I gave a presentation that was kind of the foundation of my talk today. And that was essentially like, here are some kind of activities I'm thinking about integrating into my course using Assassin's Creed Odyssey to teach about the ancient Greek and Roman world. And the response there, it was really quite helpful, and it was very positive, and they were also kind of like, okay, now actually like go do a study about it. Because I hadn't actually run the thing, right? This was just my ideas at the time. And so now, 4 years later, and a lot of IRB submissions and revisions, and a worldwide pandemic, but I finally did run the study, and I have a limited amount of results. So let's go ahead and dive in and talk a little bit about that. So my talk today is going to discuss my redesign of a course called Classics 160B1 Meet the Ancients. And that is a lower level general education course at the University of Arizona, where we tackle the history and culture of classical antiquity. And the course, this version of it ran in the fall of 2021 as a fully online asynchronous course. And so getting back to what Aris said earlier, it is very much kind of like, come take our class, we play games, it's lots of fun. And that's actually really important at our university, because the way that our department gets funded is primarily through course enrollments and also through the number of majors that we have. And so it's a very kind of competitive ecology at the U of A. And so getting students into those courses is kind of vital for our continued existence. So the goal of this kind of redesign was twofold, right? Part of it was to improve student outcomes, right? To get a sense for the way in which students achieve the learning outcomes for the course, which focused on factual knowledge, using diverse kinds of evidence to support an argument, and examining ancient texts and material culture. And the way that I went about trying to do this was essentially to redesign the course and give students the option about two different assignment tracks that they could pursue. One of those being a traditional kind of reading response assignment track, and another one being a video game-based assignment track. So the first of those, this kind of traditional reading response assignment track, is more or less exactly what it sounds like, right? So students read ancient texts in English, and then they respond to a prompt in written form. So it could look something along the lines of this, right? Go ahead and read Hesiod's Theogony, and then go ahead and write your own origin story, mimicking Hesiod's style, and then write me a further analysis about how your origin story mimics that of Hesiod's. So that's kind of what they were previously doing in the class, and that's what one subset of the students pursued. The other option was to kind of build, use that still as a foundation, but then build upon it using Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And so they would still produce the same sort of output, right? The output was still a short written essay, but now they would combine their reading of the ancient texts with doing some sort of exploration or activity in the video game. And so an example might be something along the lines of this, right? Read Pausanias' description of Delphi and the sacred way in the Temple of Apollo, then go ahead and journey there in the video game. Describe, right? Take notes on what you observe as you work your way up the sacred way to the Temple of Apollo, and then compare your own observations in the game to what we see in the ancient texts. So those are kind of two examples of what these two tracks end up looking like. Now, a little bit about the game itself. If you're in the audience here, it's likely that you have some kind of knowledge of the game already. But it's a large blockbuster game, about 5 years old now. Traditionally, the reviews are like, essentially it's known just as much for its kind of vibrant environment as it is the gameplay itself. The gameplay is often kind of described as maybe rather repetitive, but people do say that the environment, the natural and cultural environment is really quite amazing. And layering on the kind of discovery tour mode, which allows you to explore that environment without the combat and the quests and things along those lines, gives students the opportunity to just dive right in without having the same sort of learning curve that you would as though if you were actually playing the game. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to take a look at a couple examples of kind of what students would be doing and what the prompts would be for the assignments, and then we'll get into the data for what their feedback was. So we got a video here. I think we're going to have the same sort of issue. Let's see if this works. Okay, there we go. So again, this is getting back to the assignment at the site of Delphi, and they would be doing what you see on the screen here, and then they would be reading Pausanias, and he describes the city as when you enter it, you see these temples in a row. The first is in ruins. The second one is devoid of statues, kind of implying that most of them do have these kind of statues of emperors out in front. The fourth one is dedicated to the goddess Athena, forethought, and has this massive gold shield out in front of it dedicated by Croesus the Lydian. And so they would be exploring in this sort of way, then they would be reading, and then they would be doing that sort of comparison. The next one here. All right, let's see if we can go out and come back in. Well, anyway, the next one takes them to the Athenian Acropolis. And the Temple of Athena Parthenos, right, of course, the Parthenon, and they would go in and around and up on top of it, and they would be noting the architectural styles, the decoration, the columns, the capitals, the architrave, all that stuff. And then they would do the same thing on the Temple of Athena Nike, and what they would be trying to do is figure out the similarities and differences between this kind of classical Doric style temple and a classical Ionic style temple, and trying to derive those architectural characteristics on their own. And then afterwards, they would read Vitruvius and see what the ancient authors have to say about that. And then a kind of third example would take them through the city of Athens. We'll take them through the city of Athens, where they see kind of the daily life about what's going on there. The Kerameikos, the ceramics district, the stonemasons, that sort of thing. And they would use one of those as an opportunity to go learn more about something that they're particularly interested in. So that just gives you a sense of the types of things that students would be doing in the game, and then they would be writing up a short essay afterwards. Okay, so that's kind of the background. That's the way that the course looks. In terms of the actual methodology then, what I allowed students to do, right, was choose which assignment sequence they wanted for themselves. I had 266 students in the course, and it ended up being split more or less kind of evenly between the two of these. Now, when I actually ran the study, after going through this internal review board process, they only allowed me to deliver the survey or the questionnaire after the course was over. And that meant out of the 266 students, I had 26 responses, which was kind of disappointing. And as I go through this again, I've got to find a way to try to get a higher response rate, try to run this thing during the actual course to improve that. But luckily it was split pretty evenly between people who chose the kind of video game sequence and people who chose the reading response sequence. And so they were given a series of 10 questions, some combination of kind of yes, no, do you play video games outside of class, Likert scale, how much do you enjoy what's going on, and free response, right? What is it about your particular assignment that you like or dislike? Okay, now, the first thing that emerges when we actually look at the data from the students is that they very heavily self-select based on their previous gaming experiences, right? So when they have the option, 13 out of the 14 students who chose the kind of video game assignment sequence played video games for fun outside of class, right? Slightly over half of the people who chose the traditional assignment sequence do the same thing, but a notable difference there. And it's not just that, it's the amount of video games that they play is also quite different. So the average hours per week, self-reported average hours per week for the people who chose the video game assignment sequence, it's something around 7, and it's something around 4 for people who chose the traditional assignment sequence but do play video games. And a similar trend emerges for their experience with the video game Assassin's Creed series as well, right? So over half of the people who chose the video game sequence have some experience playing the game before. Only about a third of the people who chose the traditional reading response sequence have some experience playing the game. So one of the kind of useful takeaways there is that in this sort of scenario, when people are choosing, right, they're really doing so based on their previous experiences. And so if you're developing this for an entire class, 300 students, many of whom might not be playing games, that's something that you really want to keep in mind, and you probably have to go through some building familiarity with the game or games in general to kind of get them up to speed if they don't play it. Okay, now in terms of how much students kind of enjoyed the class, right? Again, this gets back to like, hey, like we play video games, this is fun, I love this stuff. And again, this is self-reported data for their own experience going through the assignment sequences. On a 10-point scale, you end up with something around a 9 for people who chose the video game sequence, and something around a 7 for people who chose the traditional assignment sequence. And I don't really have anything to contextualize this, right? Like, I haven't done this with a bunch of different types of assignments yet to understand what the kind of range of differences might be. It strikes me that something around 2 on a 10-point scale. It feels substantial there, but it would be useful to conduct this sort of study with other types of assignments as well. And when we look at self-reported learning, we see a similar trend here as well. So again, the important thing to recognize is that this is what students perceive themselves as learning, right? This isn't looking at their test scores or their projects or their essays, but the people who played the video games and chose that assignment sequence felt as though they were learning more than people who chose the traditional kind of reading response assignment sequence. And in the kind of years to come, this is going to be one of the next steps to this study, to go ahead and systematically then look not just at how students think they're learning, but actually look at the results from their projects, from their tests, from their essays, and get a sense for really whether there is any difference in terms of the output on the backside of this thing. Okay. So in terms of the free response questions, we can get a sense for kind of what it is about games that both worked well and maybe things that didn't work so well or that could be improved. The number one thing that students commented on, so 5 out of the 9 people who left qualitative comments on the video game side of things noted that it was the visualization that really helped them learn and that they found really quite enjoyable. And this makes sense, right? So we get one of the students' comments was, I think that the ability for us as students to explore the ancient world worked really well. Actually seeing the ruins and temples helped my learning about the ancient world. And this kind of makes sense, right? Our discipline is based on fragmentary texts, archaeological ruins, and that sort of thing. And so to see this fleshed out, you can imagine how that would be an attractive thing to somebody just starting to learn about the ancient world. The second most commented upon thing was the interactivity, right? So one student notes, right, I felt as if I retained the information more than I would have if I read a traditional textbook. The video game assignment allowed me to get more interactive, and I've always found that helpful when I'm learning something new. It was a breath of fresh air. And again, so it's getting students to actually do something, and I think this particularly was useful. Again, this ran in fall of 21, so we were completely online. It's an asynchronous class, and that can really frequently default to kind of, watch lectures do reading on your own, answer multiple choice questions. And so giving them something to actually actively do seemed to have worked well. In terms of things that could be improved moving forward, right, the kind of obstacles that students found when they were going through this, part of it was just logistical, right? Like the game is huge, which is both a blessing and a curse. And so if you know where to go, it's fine. But frequently students were like, they would just be wandering around for hours looking for whatever site I was telling them to go to and explore. That was something that was noted by a few of the students there, right? If I had to choose something, I'd say that it could improve by giving us a general idea of where exactly to go within the explorative setting, just in case some people find it hard as to know where to look. The other issue I ran into was kind of aligning it with the actual course, right? If you do something on Greek archaeology or Greek history, you can make it work quite well. The way that my course ran is that the first half is Greece. That aligned very, very well. The second half was like Rome, and so they're reading about like, I don't know, like Augustus or something like that. And then they're wandering around ancient Greece, and they're like, they're still having fun doing it apparently, but they don't really know why they're doing what they're doing. I tried to account for this by having them design their own sorts of activities and things like that. But there was kind of a noticeable gap between what we were covering in the lectures and then the types of assignments that they were completing in the game. Okay, so in terms of drawing some conclusions here, right? The kind of pluses, it seems to work pretty well in terms of what students are experiencing, at least when they have the opportunity to choose what type of assignment they want to do, right? So again, this is people who are already opting in to the video game thing because, in large part, they already like playing video games, but the scores in terms of enjoyment and learning, self-reported scores, turned out high. Interactivity and visuality or visualization were two things that were noted as being particularly positive, and that this seems to be particularly exciting to people who already play video games. In terms of moving forward, right, part of this is going to be scale, right? I would love to be able to get feedback from everybody in the class, although in terms of both getting feedback from everybody and the other thing up here in terms of actually using their assignments to draw conclusions about the differential achievement of learning outcomes, that's a whole nother step in terms of the IRB review process. So it's something that can be done, but it's going to take some time to get the study designed in the right way where I can use that data in an approved sort of way. The other big thing is really that I'm quite interested in is what the perspective would be from people who don't play video games on a regular basis for fun, right? Like my big takeaway was like, okay, if you like doing this, you really, really like this as a part of your class. I don't have the data yet for like, okay, let's say you don't play video games at all. Is this a burden? Is it kind of, do you get into it and it's lots of fun? Is it, eventually you'll get there, but there's a steep learning curve. So that's kind of one of the next steps that I'm really looking forward to investigating as well. So in general though, right, this is a preliminary study. I think it's encouraging in the sense that at least for lower level general education students at the college level, this can be something that does make them excited about the classical world and the ancient world more generally. And so that's the initial takeaway, and I look forward to the next steps of the project as well. So thank you all very much.